All
All
right, so
right.
we got. So how do we want to do this? We want to do the origins.
We're probably going to end up squaring around. We're going to be orbiting Glace because, as I said earlier, her story is a hell of a lot more interesting than ours with regard to origins. But
Right.
that's what
Yeah, I don't
you
think.
know.
I don't.
um,
It is far more interesting than anything we've got going on. I mean, honestly,
yeah,
what do you got?
leaps and
Bunch of
bounds.
fucking old white guys who decided they didn't want to work in computers anymore or whatever,
Right.
and decided they wanted to fucking go right.
Yep.
Yeah, that's pretty much what it was.
Meanwhile,
And
meanwhile, I just couldn't
fuck me,
put
it
things
turns out
together.
there's talent there. Who knew? I mean, honestly, what was it? My first book was put out to see if I sucked, and sure enough, I didn't. So yeah.
Dude, all of our first books were put out to see if we didn't suck.
Oh, that was cringeworthy, man. The first book got put out for any of us. It was just like, okay, here we go.
I was so excited, and now I look at it and go, "Man, I'm rewriting this shit. I'm
Oh
not."
God. Yeah, you look
Yeah.
back and you're like, I can't believe I wrote this. What
Yep.
the hell? I needed
Well,
to do this. Yeah.
God, Rob is currently reading my first book, right? And like,
Yeah.
oh
No,
God,
you know what? You're a little too critical on that because I haven't had any cringe moments reading your first.
Well,
No.
you go write something and then you end up reading like Philip K. Dick, Man in the High Castle, and you're just like fucking
Yeah.
crying because you're like,
Yeah.
look at the intricacies of all the geoscientific and you're like,
don't
ah.
don't do that to yourself, man. Don't do
Oh
it.
yeah,
We learn as we go, but so okay. So let's ask the question.
All right, I want to
What?
start. I want to
All
Okay,
right.
start.
so let's start.
I want to talk about because like everybody's kind of like enamored with my backstory. I want to go back farther than that. I want to go back to like childhood, right? I want to
Oh,
see if any of
Okay.
you
Yeah.
have like
little Glacia running around the playground.
shut up. If there's like any like personality characteristics that tie us together, not necessarily events in our lives that tie us together, but like when I was a kid, I didn't like writing per se, but I loved making up stories and I loved to draw. And I was like the kid who pretended until she was like, way too old to be pretending.
Well,
And
yeah, that makes
and
sense.
I mean, I was isolated socially because I was the weird one and I was
Right.
crazy, crazy smart. I was far beyond my peers and could talk and think beyond, what they were capable of doing. And so I just did not fit in with that. And so even though I wasn't writing at the time, I was very much crafting a world in which I could exist that was more pleasant than my own reality. And so I guess that's where I want to start. I want to know if you guys have similar experiences, even from before it became a thought that you would actually
Oh,
write your worlds down.
poetry. I hate to say it,
Poetry.
but yeah, I was a
Dude, you
little
were a
boy.
beatnik?
No, I was. You know,
Oh, you have
it
a little drum
was
too.
it was little sickly sweet. I don't even know what if and of course I had no idea about iambic pentameter or any of that kind of stuff. It
No, we're
wasn't
not
formal.
Big
there.
I
pentameter.
had
Yeah.
it was rhymey stuff, but it was I was probably 7, 6, 7 years old. My mother recorded one of them on a tape. I didn't even know it, and I've heard it since. And in between looking for a straight razor to drag across the side of my neck, other
Wait,
people
you
find it charming and very cute. And it was, but it,
were little baby Rob
yeah,
though.
it was little baby Rob. But I was my first hit at it was 6, maybe 7 years old, and
Yeah.
it lay dormant for a long time. By the way, I went
Right.
more into reading than creating, and didn't get back to it until early 20s, and that was all informal and mostly send up stuff, parody, not very shareable with regular people humor.
Right.
I submitted a short story, then got my first rejection slip and said I'm never doing this shit again, which was a lie. A few years later I did it
Well,
again, but yeah,
well, how
I
did you? Let's talk about that. I mean, you had a basis, right? You had a basis. You had a kernel. Why did you get into writing again? I mean, we're older now. You're
yeah,
we're looking for that second breath, that second thing we want to do. We want to now turn around and turn the success we've got in our careers into something that means something that matters.
You
So,
know,
and you know,
it's weird because the story that became my first book, Specimen 959, I had that general idea, not a real mature concept, but a general idea way back in my Navy days, and it wouldn't go away. It kept percolating in my brain, and I thought about that many years after I was gone from the Navy, probably 20 years. And I thought, why don't you at least try to write it into a book? Because it had taken shape in the intervening years. And I'm a journalism major. I know how to write. I was a bit of a grammar hammer since I can remember. And so I thought, I have the basic tools to do this shit. Why don't you try to be a little bit more creative about writing? And it was that story that hung around in my head. It hadn't matured itself out to the series that we know now. It was just that singular story, but it was with me for years. And it sounds kind of cliche and goofy, but I just thought, yeah, you know what? How hard can it be? So
right.
you were both right. I wanted to see if I could do it. I wanted to see if I could get a book published. That was my behind the scenes, but the material has been with me since I was 20 years old.
Well,
So
and that's great. That you gotta love stuff like that, especially things that you get a chance to go back to and revisit.
yeah,
I mean, honestly.
and it wasn't an homage to my childhood or any of that shit. I just thought it would be a cool story. It was a lot edgier when I first thought of it. It was not anywhere near as nice and pleasant as 959 is, and I say that with tongue in cheek because there's some really horrible, dreadful shit in that book. My first thought about this, it was borderline horror and very extreme, and I backed it way off because I convinced myself I would never be able to get a book written properly or published if I didn't come way back off of the horrible shit. So I tamed the hell out of it, and I thought I was being clever. I thought I was being anticipatory of what you need to do to publish a book. And I don't know whether I fooled myself or not, but it was a pebble in my shoe that just pissed me off enough to actually do it. So that was why, or my origins were in childhood, and it took 25, 30 years to get them to fruition.
So,
And that's good.
when did you start writing that manuscript? How long did that take?
18 months.
Okay, which is longer than it takes you to write a manuscript now.
By a leap and a bound.
Right?
Yeah.
By a factor of what, 3, 4?
Sure. Yeah.
You
I know how to do it now. I didn't know how to do it then.
That was
just learning how to write a book, how to outline a book is a damned handy skill, which I didn't have at that point.
Or formatting or chapter formatting and all that stuff that we screw around with because we're sitting in a rabbit hole and trying to figure out how we're going to format the thing, spending half the time instead of writing, formatting.
It never occurred to me when I wrote my first book, and I don't know if it did it may have for Glace because her condition was a little different. She was coming into this for different reasons. The creativity side was always orbiting over her head, but putting it into paper, the reason why she did that is slightly different. Ray, I'll bet you it was for you as well, but I was convinced while I was busy thinking, I wonder if I suck. And there was also a voice saying, you've written enough stuff that has been looked at and laughed at and enjoyed. I don't mean laughed at, I mean comedy stuff. Pleasantly. You know that you have at least the basic skill here. And it never occurred to me that first book was simply the first step. I didn't know shit about writing books when I wrote that book.
And I learned a lot.
I look back and think to myself, was I just being an arrogant shit, presuming that I could write a book because I was better at writing than pretty much everybody around me? Okay, that must mean that I know how to write a book. My ass, I knew how to start the process of learning how to write a book.
I knew how to put words to paper. That was the difference.
Right.
I knew how to put words to paper.
Big difference between knowing how to tell a story and knowing how to write a book. Very, very big difference.
Yeah, there is.
I learned a lot. A lot has been learned since that first book. I mean, a lot about structure, a lot about timing, how you create a structure a sentence in creating action versus dialogue versus prose. Even the words like prose, I had no idea what any of this stuff meant. When I started writing, I had no idea, what a monologue really was, or what I did, what third person, first person, omnipresent, limited. I had no idea. I just wrote, And it was funny, but you start learning this stuff and you realize, oh, this is how I write. Oh, now I see what they mean, and that's basically what it was when I first started.
You start understanding the definitions, the keywords that, you look at your stuff and you go, oh, that's the name of what
I but then you then you do the mistakes. Like mine was, I was switching POVs, like 3 times in the book, and I had to go back and fix it and then they were, past versus present, and some of the actions took place at that moment. Some of them were reflecting on, and then some of them were base characters with limited. Some of them have omnipresent. Some of them were third person narrator, and you're just like, it was hard to read because I understood how to tell a story. I didn't know how to construct a story. There was a difference.
Absolutely.
Well, and for you, I mean, like, that's indicative of your personality, though. I mean, you have an abundance, like an excess of creativity. And you're like, oh my God, I got all this information and I got to give it to you. Yeah. And I'm going to give it to you like this, because you need to know this thing this way. You need to know this thing this way. You need to know this thing this way. And instead of knowing the definition of, third limited or third omniscient and picking one and sticking to it, you're like, information, creativity here.
And there was
story. Have my story.
Yeah.
Well, that was the thing. And there was a couple pieces of advice. When I got about halfway through the book, I went back and rewrote a bunch of it because somebody read what I had written, and they gave me a very famous quote that you guys have probably seen all over the internet at some time or another. And that quote is, you can tell somebody the moon is shining, or you can show it glinting off the glass pane. And there is definitely a difference between the two. Yeah. And I didn't get it at first, but then you're writing, and one time you have that epiphany and you go, oh, I understand now. You have to go back and rewrite everything. So at that point, you're not just, telling somebody a story, but they're actually living it, and that's the big difference. You're actually progressing through a story and explaining things as you go.
So this brings up an interesting point, and I've been asked this before. When did and I will ask it of either of you because it gets back to origins of writing. When did you understand you have a voice, and when did you recognize it? Because it collides with the formulaic, it collides badly with the structure that we talk about as though it's a given, the definitional side of writing and the way to do it and the way not to do it. And it's malleable, but it runs squarely into voice, and we all have one. Yeah. And I don't care what you do, you are never going to lose it. I can look at the stuff I wrote when I was 20 years old.
And you have a very similar voice.
Wow, I mean, there it is. Well, that's me.
Let me give you an example. When I was growing up as a kid, when I 30 some odd years ago, I was a young kid, and I spent an inordinate amount of time in my head for family reasons, everything else. I spent a lot of time constructing worlds and stories and daydreams. It wasn't until when I was 13 years old that I actually sat down at an IBM typewriter and wrote my first book.
A green Selectric.
Yeah, and the big IBM whirring, and it was in my grandparents' basement. My grandfather was the only one who read it, and he was so proud and so happy. Somewhere in that basement, or in amongst the things, is that manuscript. First thing I ever wrote. I recreated it in high school and named it Mutant in the Research Center. It was a horror story, and I won, county awards for it, school level awards for it. And then I walked away from writing, joined the military, did all that fun stuff, started life, got, married, divorced, did all that stuff and the kids. And then one day I sat down not too long ago and said, you know what? I'm now at a position in my life where I'm telling my kids to live their dream. And Lucas, my son, bless his heart, looked at me and finally said, "Are you living yours?" And I went, "Fuck," And the answer was no, I wasn't. I had a lot of cool stuff and I was doing a lot of neat stuff, but there were some changes in my life, and I was a little lost. I was a little lost. I had to give up a few things because of some injuries, and I said, you know what? I still kept daydreaming. I still had those little worlds in my head, and they never went away. So I took one of those worlds and started writing it. But it was a long. I rewrote that thing 3 times before I figured out I had a voice. I mean, everything I wrote was what it was kind of like Ludlum because I had read Ludlum, or kind of like King, or kind of like Kuntz, or just all these different authors I had read. And about the third rewrite, I started to realize this isn't like anybody I've read. All of a sudden, I'm looking at the book going, I'm comfortable with how this tells, how the story progresses. It kind of takes a little bit from this and a little bit from that, but that was my first time I kind of realized maybe I do have my own way of telling a story. I suspected. Didn't know if it was good or not. We wouldn't know that for another year, but I had I think I spent 4 or 5 months writing down every story idea I had ever come up with in my head, and I have like 70 in a folder of outlines or notes or blurbs or titles.
There's the abundance.
There's the abundance. I mean, literally.
Right.
And it's
Lace is right.
Oh yeah, no, I've got stories from here till there will be stuff in that folder when I'm long done writing. So somebody else may take those and
so
go.
let me ask both of you a question. I've gotten this one, but it's tangential. They don't come right at me because I don't think people think this through who don't do what we do.
Oh God.
But I have had it split up into several different iterations, and it all comes down to one. If you distill it down, the thought and the intent can be expressed in a single question. When you were first starting out writing, Glace, it's different for you because you had something compelled you. Ray was exploding with creativity when he was a little kid. All the stuff that he created in his mind. Welcome to the show. I was doing the same shit when I was a little kid.
Yeah.
Did you, if you can think back that far, and if you're cognizant of it, if not, then substitute it to when we all started writing our stuff currently. Either one is okay. Did you consider yourself a storyteller or a writer?
Yeah, storyteller. Honestly, and I didn't even consider myself that at first. I didn't really know what to call myself. I just knew I liked to have these little worlds when I was driving home from work or lying down in bed before I started listening to other stuff, and I wanted to escape, and I would create these worlds in my head. Absolutely. I just called myself a dreamer. Honestly, I just like to daydream. That's what it was.
And I was asked this, and now I'll give you the other side of the story. When I would have these conversations, people would say, "Well, did you get a journalism degree because you needed the skill to be an outlet or release for all of these things?" And I told them no, because the worlds that we create, the universes that we dreamt up as little kids, that we're all waiting to pour out in the stuff that we write as adults. None of that stuff. I thought it was not a little bit abnormal. I thought of myself as kind of a weirdo and a dork, and I thought it was escapism. It was bored with my environment. Yes. It was tired of tedious older brothers who were dumber than a bag of hammers and just older than me. It was a lot of things, which is not a very nice thing to say, but it was escapism. And the more elaborate they were, the better. And then when you find the way to wordcraft that stuff, this little synthesis happens, and you become a storyteller / writer.
Well,
they're separate prior to that. That's my point.
I know I did. I don't know if you guys did. I spent a lot of time while writing my first book trying to decide how to define what a storyteller, a writer, and an author was. At what point would I call myself what?
Yes.
And that was a big deal to me at the time. I was like, okay, what am I? Where? Because people, well, what do you do? Well, I do this, but I'm also doing something. And you're not quite sure what to call it. Well, I'm writing. Well, oh, are you an author? Are you a novelist? Are you? I have no. I don't know. I told everybody something different because I really didn't have a definition for it, and it's not like you can Google it and go, oh, here's a definition for author. So it was like, okay, and I had finally come up with, I'm a writer while I'm writing. Once I get published, then I'm an author, and then it works up from there, successful author, or non-successful author, or good author, or bad author, whatever, what kind of genre you do, all that stuff comes later. Yep. But that's how I defined it. It wasn't until I hit publish on my first book that I went, I am now an author. I am now an author. It wasn't until my second book that I actually went, I am now officially a novelist. Because not only have I written one book, but I've written 2 books.
Yes. Yeah.
And anybody, and that's the thing. I never got a journalist degree, and anybody who's edited my books can attest to the fact that I can write in 14 languages, and none of them are English. In fact, none of them are speakable because they're all computer languages. So half the stuff you read is like, what the hell are you doing? Oh, that's how I use special characters, I mean, when you write things like Java and C++, you go back to English, it looks a little weird. It really does. And it's true. It's how it works.
We all
man, I stressed so much over that, though. I did. I stressed so much over my label and how I defined that label.
What else do you start that is so singular, though? What else do you do that you are utterly alone throughout the process with in little or no instruction, with no experience? Nobody comes along and taps you on the shoulder and says, here, let me show you how to write. Let me show you how to tell a story. We all start that trip alone.
Oh, yeah. There are a lot of people who read your stuff later and give you plenty of tutors or advice, and some of it good, some of it bad. But a lot of it is just spending time talking to other writers, Google, Common Sense, whatever blogs, whatever information you can get a hold of and glean and go, how do I do this? Yeah. I mean, but the world of it was so much bigger than just writing a book. That was the thing. It was a whole, there are 6 different hats to wear and things you need to do. And I was fortunate enough of my skills translated because I'm a visual person. I'm creative and I'm visual. So everything I did was visual, all the way up to cover construction, to understanding the font sets, understanding the logos, everything that I did was always visual and creative. So I probably had 50 different cover renditions of my first book before I decided on what it was going to be. I mean, honestly, I could pull those out and everyone would look, what the hell is that thing? I didn't know what a book cover was. I had to go look at one and go, well, maybe I can create that,
That just spurs a question for me. When you started your journey, was it recommended or suggested by your physicians as an option of ways to develop or to cultivate and realign some of the synapses, whatever the hell they thought it was going to do for you? Or did they tell you specifically you should write?
No, I was told by my neurologist that, the brain is not elastic. Nothing's going to come back. You have to teach it. And so, he was like, either go to occupational therapy or figure out some things to do for yourself. He did tell me, write everything down. But what he meant was take notes on everything, like day-to-day life things, whether you take your medicine, whether you have to do the dishes, whether you put laundry in, absurdly mundane things. And he was like, and then try some other stuff, learn some advanced maths, take up art, do something, figure something out, something that can occupy your time, that occupies your brain, and figure out a way to be able to organize a process and learn a new skill. That was
so when you took a tumble off of this giant walking cat food machine and went bonkity bonk on the back of your head, where was Lark Hendricks? Had she been born yet, or was she non-existent?
Well, it's funny. I never really talk about this bit, but you know how I always rag on people? I say that, every guy and every girl in America thinks that they have, the next great American novel, or they've got a great story that needs to be told. And I rag on them, and I'm like, okay, well, you don't have a book. You probably have a prologue. Everybody has a prologue in their head. and thinks that this is a really cool thing. You know, I had a prologue that I had done probably 10 or 12 years prior to that. Oddly enough, in another very, very dark part of my life. This is funny because I've never told this portion of my story. And I found a USB drive within about 2 weeks of what would have been my 6-month checkup, I guess, where it was kind of like, okay, this is your status, and you're going to have to do something to fix, you know, to augment, to mitigate. And I happened to find a USB drive that had this prologue in it, and it was Lark. It was essentially what became the first chapter. It was just the introduction to her. And I was like, oh my God, I remember where I was going with this. I forgot. I thought that it was on a computer that was 2 computers ago. And I thought it was.
Oh. Did you have her by name?
Yeah.
See, that's interesting.
The last name was different. The last name was Sam Martin. And
Simpsons. Sorry.
Sam Martin, not Simpsons. And
I like the Simpsons better.
Yeah, it would have been pretty cool. But yeah, no, she's Hendrix now. It totally random. Just happened to be listening to Jimi Hendrix. I'm like, I don't like Sam Martin. It's gonna be Hendrix, just because that was what was on. You know.
Sweet.
I know, right? Can you think of a better one? I mean, come on.
It's awesome.
Doesn't love Hendrix.
No,
So,
well, yeah, only Philistines don't love Hendrix. Let's face it.
The one, everybody likes Hendrix. Whatever. Anyway.
Jimmy Page is better.
So, all right. So origins, and the same in so many ways and completely different in so many ways. The common theme, though, you heard it from all three of us. It was escapism. It was a place to go as a refuge from the shit that was tedious and boring and unfulfilling. And I had no intention of turning that into a writing experience later. It was just, it's part of who you are.
Well, and here's the thing, you know what I mean? Like kind of what Ray was talking about with definition. You know, when I started writing, I had no intent. I didn't even know if I was going to finish the thing. I didn't even construct it as a book. I was like, I'm just going to tell a story. I'm just going to keep writing. There was no limit. There was no, I have to tell this in 100,000 words or whatever. It wasn't until I had almost 200,000 words that I was like, oh shit, maybe this is what I'll do. Maybe I'll actually be a writer. Because as Ray was saying, you know, at that point I was a storyteller and I was writing. It wasn't until I decided to actually make books out of it that I called myself a writer. And then I was like, my definition was a little bit later than Ray's. I wasn't allowing myself to call myself an author until I sold my first copy. And it had to be paperback. Till I sold my first paperback copy.
Right.
It was the day I released the book. Sold a bunch of them, actually. And I was like, holy shit. You know,
cool.
That morning I was like,
you crossed over.
I'm an author now. What does that mean? And
that thing.
What happened at that point in time was a huge amount of pressure, because now all of a sudden I had people who were reading who gave a damn about the first part of this story. And honestly, I didn't know where the story was going to go. And that was when I realized that I was very ill prepared for the journey that I had just sort of stumbled onto, because I didn't think anybody would give a shit. I really didn't. And
I get that. Yep.
Oh boy, presto when they do. That's a bizarre feeling when people. You know what's really weird is the first time you read a review from somebody you never knew and will never meet, and it's on the mark, and it could be a razor, but could be gentle. But when you see somebody who gets it, who is a million miles away from you, figuratively speaking, that is the day you really cross over. And now you're thinking, okay, shit. No, they're not being nice to me. They don't know me. I think no obligation, right?
That for me was when I started taking myself seriously. Yep. When I would look at Amazon reviews and I was like, I don't know who that is, and they love.
All of a sudden,
analyzed
people,
they
no
saw
idea.
Things.
Yeah, exactly.
In the book that I was like, I don't know if anybody will see this, but I know, and so maybe somebody will pick up on it, and that kept happening, and it was insane. You know, I was like, oh my God.
Well, yeah, there's a lot of fear and stress with that. You start getting people who like your book, you're like, oh crap, I actually can write. I got to put out another one.
Right.
Is it going to be as good as the first one?
Yeah, exactly. What if I let them down?
Go? Holy crap! How is this going to work? What happens if it sucks? The first one's good, the second one sucks, and they're going to hate me. Yeah.
Dude.
Wow.
I'm there right now. I have 3 books in a series out. I have my 4th sort of roughly outlined, and I've got 10K, and I'm terrified. I'm currently terrified
every time
because I'm being drawn to this other project that I currently feel very passionate about, but also I'm not really I know what happens in book 4, but I don't necessarily know exactly how and where that. I have created one of the major faux pas of being an author. I know what happens in Hawthorne, and I know where it goes. I know where Lark's story goes. I don't know where Hawthorne ends.
Oh, I get it. Yep.
I am currently absolutely terrified that I will let down my fans, that I will let down my readership. And it's because I'm so far into that process. I am there. They are there. My fans are there. I have a group of people who expect me to continue this story. And so at that point, it's out of my hands. I have to.
I get that.
Yeah,
no, I get that. I've got the new one coming out, and it's a whole different set. And I got people who are excited to read it. People who read the 3 from Shadow War Chronicles are like, yeah, I love the sound of the story. I want to read it, and I'm going back through it, and I'm like, is it gonna be good? Is it? Well, I need to rewrite this piece, and I'm looking at this chapter, going, oh my god, that's horrible. I rewrite that piece. The prologue's like a nightmare that I go to bed every night and kind of sweat over. It's just. Yeah, you have that, like, hey, maybe McDonald's is hiring, I can always go put on a paper hat or something, but there have been times I look at it and I go, what if it sucks? What if all I have is this? What if, I can't transcend to something else? What if I can't do another genre? What if, because we have seeds of doubt. In life, we have seeds of doubt.
Yeah, they never go away. I don't care how many books you sell. I'm willing to bet that is a tormentor for people who've sold 1 million books. I want to mention something before we wind it down. Did anybody notice but me that Ray's got a Peaky Blinders haircut now?
Dude, I love my Peaky Blinders haircut. That is awesome. Peaky Blinders is badass. Anybody who hasn't seen that show, it's that 1920s British.
Yeah, you look like you're one of the Peaky fucking Blinders.
I need to grab the knife, because you're gonna get the Peaky Blinders.
You're
gonna pay your dues, eh?
You would love
Peaky over there. You're good to go.
You gotta watch it. It's pretty.
Oh yeah. Peaky Blinders is awesome. That is true. That is a good set. We're gonna go over and get the mix, eh?
I'm just happy that Alfie didn't die. That's all I'm saying.
Hey man, I like Alfie.
Alfie Solomons is a bad mojammer. I love that guy.
Oh yeah.
Well, this was fun, and man, it kind of it makes you feel like.
Group. It wasn't a podcast. It was a support group.
Well,
we're all sitting here crying, going, "Oh my God, I might suck." And
let's see what the response is. If we get hammered by the AIC listeners, then we'll know we did.
Yeah, the Peanut Gallery.
This is cheaper than going to a shrink, so I'd rather talk to you guys.
It's true. So yeah, it's true. This is cheaper than going to a shrink. You're absolutely right.
Cool.
Oi vey. Oi vey. Mazel tov. Yeah, right. Bag of dicks, take 26.
All right, I'm going to do some experimentation when nobody's around and can hear me.